Oliver asks for more. This chapter is a part of ICSE curriculum from 2025 batch, and this chapter is an excerpt from Charles Dickens' novel Oliver Twist. So let's start with the chapter, and in the end we do some explanation part also. Yeah? A little background first for those who are new and do not have any idea about Oliver Twist. This story is about Oliver. Oliver was an orphan, so he lived in a workhouse. Now he and his companions, that is, other orphan children, were ill-treated and starved in this workhouse. So this Oliver asks for more is a short scene where Oliver is asking for more food as he and his companions were starving. That was my explanation. Now the background, that is the story background given by the textbook. The orphan Oliver and his companions were ill-treated and starved in the workhouse. One day, a tall boy announced that he would eat the boy who slept next to him unless he was given extra gruel. Gruel means soup. A council was held and it was decided that Oliver should ask the master for more. Oliver Twist was then bound into apprenticeship with an undertaker. Undertaker means a person who makes coffins. Oliver Twist exposes the cruel treatment of many orphans in London in the mid-19th century industrial age England. This excerpt reflects Dickens' own experiences and difficult childhood. Despite the evident pathos, Dickens manages to infuse the central character with gentility and empathy. So let's start. Among other buildings in a town in England, there was a house for poor people who had no money and nowhere to live. This was called the workhouse. Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse. His mother, a young woman, lay ill in bed. A doctor and an old woman stood by her side. She lifted her head from the pillow. "Let me see the child and die," she said. "Oh, you mustn't talk before dying yet," said the doctor. "No, dear," said the old woman. "You are too young to die." The young woman shook her head and held out her hand towards the child. The doctor put the child in her arms. She pressed her cold white lips to his face and then fell back. "She's dead," said the doctor. "Yes, poor dear," said the old woman as she took the child away from the dead mother. "Poor dear." "She was a good-looking girl," said the doctor as he put on his hat and gloves. "Where did she come from?" "She was brought here last night," said the old woman. "She was lying in the street. She had walked a long way and her shoes had holes in them. Nobody knows where she came from or where she was going to." The doctor raised the dead woman's left hand. "Ah, the usual story," he said. "I see that she has no ring on her finger. She wasn't married. Good night." He went home to his dinner. The old woman sat down on a chair in front of the fire and began to dress the baby. She dressed him in the very old clothes used for babies who were born in the workhouse. The child was an orphan, born into a world which had no love or pity for him. No one was able to discover who the baby's father was or what his mother's name was. Mr. Bumble, an important officer in the town, invented a name for the baby. He chose the name Oliver Twist. "Ah, we named the new babies here in order from A to Z," he explained when people asked. "I named the last one Swooble. This one is Twist. The next one will be Unwin." At the age of 9, Oliver was a pale, thin child. He and the other workhouse boys never had enough warm clothes or food. They were given only 3 meals of thin soup every day. On Sundays, they had a small piece of bread. They were fed in a big hall. A large pot stood at one end of the room and the soup was served by the master. Each boy had one small bowl of soup and no more. The bowls never needed washing because the boys cleaned them with their spoons until they shone. One day, Oliver and his friends decided that one boy would walk up to the master after supper and ask for more soup. Oliver was chosen. In the evening, the boys sat down at the tables. The master stood by the pot and the soup was served. It disappeared quickly. The boys whispered and made signs to Oliver. He stood up from the table and went to the master with his bowl and spoon in his hands. "Please, sir," he said, "I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he went very pale. He looked with surprise at the small boy. "What?" said the master at last in a quiet voice. "Please, sir," repeated Oliver, "I want some more." The master hit Oliver with his spoon, then seized him and cried for help. Mr. Bumble rushed into the room and the master told him what Oliver had said. "He asked for more?" Mr. Bumble cried. "I cannot believe it. One day they will hang the boy." He took Oliver away and shut him in a dark room. The next morning, a notice appeared on the workhouse gate. 5 pounds were offered to anybody who would take Oliver Twist. Oliver was a prisoner in that cold, dark room for a whole week. Every morning he was taken outside to wash and Mr. Bumble beat him with a stick. And then he was taken into a large hall where boys had their soup. Mr. Bumble beat him in front of everybody. He cried all day. When night came, he tried to sleep, but he was cold, lonely, and frightened. But one day, outside the high workhouse gate, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sowerberry. Mr. Sowerberry was a tall, thin man who wore black clothes and made coffins. Many of his coffins were for the poor people who died in the workhouse. "I have prepared the coffins for the 2 women who died last night," he said to Mr. Bumble. "Good," said Mr. Bumble. "You will be rich one day. Mr. Sowerberry, do you know anybody who wants a boy and 5 pounds? He raised his stick and pointed to the notice on the gate. Now for the explanation, that is how to study for the exam. So children, if you see, this chapter is divided into 3 parts. The first part is Oliver being born, that is mother, doctor and the old woman. The second part of this chapter is about Oliver and his fellow workhouse mates, where they are ill-treated. So learn everything about their ill treatment. What they were given, that is the soup part, the thin soup, description of Mr. Bumble, description of the master who served the soup, how Oliver went, approached the master asking for soup and everything. The third part is the cruelty of the workhouse, that is how they ill-treated Oliver Twist. Yes, and of course, not to forget the naming ceremony, that is how Mr. Bumble named the new children of the workhouse. So I hope children this audiobook was helpful. Keep listening this audiobook and other audiobooks that I post. What happens is, when you keep on listening, you remember the story like the lyrics of a song, and it saves a lot of your time. I hope you are aware that I teach online ICSE children only. So connect with me if you wish to join my class. All the best.